The Oklahoma City, to me, are by far one of the most interesting teams in the NBA for this upcoming season, and it's not because of all of these assets they have down the road. It's not because of how good they might be this year. It's because of how they're going to try and blend those, mesh those two concepts together to be good this year, to still be good in the future, and how much they really want to push those two ideas together. Now, we've all known for the last couple of seasons that Oklahoma City was assembling a roster that was one of the best, if not the best, young cores in the entire league, and that was the case before last year's draft class, where they brought in Jalen Williams from Santa Clara, who was fantastic. That was before they brought in Chet Holmgren, who still hasn't played in a regular season game for this team. And most importantly, it was before Shai Gilgeous-Alexander turned into one of the best guards in the league. An all-NBA caliber ceiling for him was something that was pretty unforeseen 18 months ago. Him being a good player, him being an all-star, that was something that you could have foreseen. But him being legitimately one of the best guards in the entire league changes a lot of things for Oklahoma City moving forward before you even account for Jalen Williams that last year, as well as Chet Holmgren joining the team this year. And the question for them now becomes, one, how good are they going to be this season? Are they going to be a team that's challenging for a top 6 seed in the Western Conference, a loaded, incredibly talented Western Conference? This is a team that nearly made the playoffs anyway last year, despite not having Chet, despite still being a young, growing team that really wasn't trying necessarily to make the postseason. And then, how much of those future assets, if any, are they willing to give up to try and push towards something significant this season or next season or the year after? And there's a couple of different points that need to be focused on here. First and foremost is, what does Chet look like this season? It's not entirely fair to figure out exactly what his career is going to look like with just one season coming off of a major injury the way that he did last year. But if he shows some flashes, some upside of a guy that's going to be an all-star caliber player down the road, or a really, really strong connector for this group as someone that can score, protect the rim, and it doesn't look like the lack of strength is going to be an issue for him at the NBA level, that just adds one more piece to this team. And you can start to see, importantly for them, a lineup come together here of SGA, Giddey, Jalen Williams, Chet, whoever else you want to put out there. And then you can start to construct a plan around those 4 guys. And if Chet doesn't quite look like one of those guys, he looks like an interesting piece, but he's not on the level of a player, of an asset of someone like Giddey, SGA, Jalen Williams, then that's okay too. But they really need to figure out where he is and where he falls within this. Is he just a possible trade piece on the level of someone like Lou Dort, or is he on the level of those top 3 guys? And for this season for Oklahoma City, the most overlooked thing about them is they could have been better than they were last year, and they can easily be a 45, even more than that, win team this year if they want to, despite the strength of this conference, because they're just that talented, and because SGA and Giddey and Jalen Williams and hopefully Chet and all those guys together are just that good. This is not a team now that we can continue to think about as a team of the future, a team that might be good next year, the year after, looks to be title contenders in 2027. That still might be the case, but they also could be a top 6 team in the West this season. Now, obviously, because of injuries or because maybe they're not quite ready, because of the strength of the conference, they could still be kind of hovering around 40, 42 wins. They could still certainly be a play-in team, or maybe even worse than that, depending on how the year goes. But we are officially at that point for Oklahoma City where they need to start considering themselves, and they probably do consider themselves better than just that lower level team or a mid-level team in the Western Conference. And of course, with that comes the question, at what point do you press the go button on this team? At what point do you decide the rebuild is over and it is time for us to push for a top 4 seed in the West? It's time for us to push for bringing in another star. Or is that even necessary? Is the roster so good and they built up so many young assets that at no point does it make sense to get rid of any of these top guys? Chet, Jalen Williams, Giddey, certainly not SGA. At no point does it make sense to get rid of them and just let them grow alongside each other. And that, to me, has been the strength of this rebuild and of the way that they've built this team the entire time, is it hasn't necessarily been focused on one individual avenue, one individual player becoming a high-level guy. They've had 6 different paths to some kind of championship contention over the last couple of seasons, and a lot of those paths still exist. Primarily, at this point, it is focused on SGA as the main guy and the other guys continuing to develop, but they are certainly in an interesting position. The other part of this that comes into the equation is, as we move into this new era in the NBA with the second apron and teams being punished for spending more money, at some point, Oklahoma City is going to have to decide, do we want to commit a ton of money to an SGA, Josh Giddey backcourt, even as good as both those guys are? Do they fit together? At what point do we want to maybe prioritize Jalen Williams as the second best player on the roster rather than Josh Giddey? How much of a future do we see with Chet Holmgren on this roster? I know it seems early for Oklahoma City to be making these kinds of decisions, but because of how good they are now, as well as this new landscape that we're moving into in terms of spending, there they're going to have to make some of those tough choices. And at some point down the road, there might be a Giddey and some stuff in exchange for a star trade, or they might have to get rid of Chet for lower than actual value because they don't want to have to pay him. These are decisions that Oklahoma City is going to have to make. And to me, not only is that really exciting because we're going to get some clarity on what they're going to look like and what their future looks like, but also it's unbelievably interesting because the concept of a team rebuilding so well and having so many assets that they simply can't retain them is something that we haven't really seen that much throughout the history of the NBA. It's going to be fascinating to see exactly how it unfolds for the Thunder. Because generally speaking, the thought process for this team has been, let's get young players, let's get assets, and at some point, just like most teams do, we'll trade a lot of that stuff for a star and we'll really level up this team. And under the old CBA, under the old rules, that concept probably could still work. They could down the road be a contender for any number of stars around the league just because of the amount of assets that they have. And you add that player to SGA, maybe you trade Giddey in this scenario and you've got SGA, Jalen Williams, Chet, plus this star, this all NBA level guy to put alongside SGA. Then all of a sudden you have your team and you move forward with that group and you're a top 4 team in the West. That's always kind of been the concept. But now that the rules have changed, as well as the fact that OKC hasn't really missed on very many of their assets, and so they almost have too many. They almost have too many guys they need to pay, too many high-level players, too many foundational guys that at some point, some of those decisions are going to have to be made. And it's really interesting how not only they've done so well with this rebuild, but also how the rules have changed and how that's impacted what they might be able to keep on the roster realistically over the next couple of seasons. But to bring it back around to this upcoming season, I'm telling you, do not sleep on this Oklahoma City team. They are a team that could 100% be dangerous as a top 6 seed. They have all the talent in the world, and if we continue to see progression from SGA, Giddey, Jalen Williams, if Chet is really, really good as what will be his rookie season gets started, there's the potential here if they add more floor spacing, if they add, a little bit more creativity in terms of players on the wings. This is a roster construction that I would be terrified to play against on a night-to-night basis. They play extremely hard. They figure out ways to guard despite not having a ton of size. I think Chet is going to help them a ton in terms of that rim protection ability. And this upcoming season could be the last year that we really view Oklahoma City as kind of one of those in-between teams, a team that might not have to play in a play-in in order to get into the postseason. And next year, the year after that, depending on what they do with this roster, depending on how players continue to develop, this is going to be an extremely dangerous team, maybe even sooner than we could have expected. And as we get closer to the trade deadline, depending on where this team is at, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them make even just like a medium-sized move to add to this group and really see how far they can push things in a conference in the West that, yes, is extremely talented, but so is Oklahoma City. And I don't think they're going to be on the outside looking in of the top 6, maybe even the top 4 in this conference for too much longer. This season, yes, they might still be a play-in team, but within the next 12 to 18 months, I fully expect Oklahoma City to be one of the best teams in the entirety of the Western Conference, revolving mostly around Shea, but depending on what they do with the rest of the roster, they could be even more dangerous than that.